Greetings everyone, and we're back to another episode of this fanfic read through. This is episode number 7, and I'm going to read to you my fanfic Ghost Crime that I wrote back in 2016. This is chapter 7 because it's the first one I'm reading. In this chapter we have art by me for this fanfic, and it shows Tucker Foley, and I like this one, especially the one with him and Danny in the lower right corner where he and Danny is like the best of friends, because that is how they are described in the TV series, and that is how I want to describe them in this series. It's not really easy to write Tucker as a character because most of the time he is technology and meat, and that's his two characteristics, as well as being best friends with Danny. So yeah, I'm trying to flush him out sometimes, and sometimes I was thinking, is this something that Tucker would do? Or is this something Sam would do? Or is this something another character would do? Is this even in character? Yeah, people who write fanfic, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, without taking up more of your time, here it is. Ghost Crime, Chapter 7. Louis, Rosie and Danny walked out into the conference room, Sam and Tucker taking off their headphones as they saw them. "You okay? What did he ask?" asked Tucker, getting up from where he'd been sitting with his phone, offering Danny a seat. "Just normal questions," said Danny, sitting down beside Sam, whose eyes had been on Prentice the entire time. Rosie walked over to Prentice. "Got any news?" he asked in a low tone, hoping that the teenagers wouldn't hear, not knowing about Danny's above-average hearing. The cameras at the hospital was a dead end. Some static kept them from picking up anything before the attack, and then they broke with every lamp when the guy walked in, she said, tapping her phone. "Do we know why the lamps all exploded?" asked Rosie, scratching his chin. "Something overheated the power system," she said, waving at Luke, who tossed her a report from where he was sitting, still going through the paperwork. The report said that there was a power surge, but that it shouldn't have taken out the emergency lights and would have affected more than just the lamps. Indeed, thought Danny. He had once made every lamp in school explode when Daz had gotten a jump on him moments after he'd fought Skulker, but it had never happened again, and he didn't know why it had to begin with. The door out to the rest of the station opened, and Agent Gero walked in, talking to a skinny redhead with thick glasses and geek stamped all over him. She stopped, seeing the teenagers looking, and walked over to the rest of the team, whispering to Rosie. "Detective Vega got some news from the forensics," she said, and glanced over at Danny. "And I got witness statements from the hospital." Danny scratched his neck and whispered to his friends, "I think this guy suspects something." "You think?" shot Tucker back in a whisper. "They are the FBI's behavioral analysis unit. They are like Jazz, but much cooler and more experienced." "They are as oblivious as your parents," added Sam, her eyes still on the agents. Rosie turned to the teenagers. "You mind waiting in there while we talk?" he asked, pointing to the interview room. It was more an order than a request. Shrugging, the three friends picked up the thing and walked into the smaller room, closing the door behind them. "Danny?" Sam gave him a familiar look. Sitting down on the couch again, Danny closed his eyes, now concentrating on hearing what was said through the glass. "Should the kid be out of the hospital?" asked the detective, surprise in his voice. "Yes, he should," said Agent Gero, and Danny could feel her eyes on him, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "There must be something interesting in the forensics report, or you wouldn't bring it here yourself," said Prentice, and Danny could hear Luke's chair move as he got up from where he'd been sitting across the tables from them. There was the sound of papers moving. "First off, it looks like our second Vic here interrupted the killer before he got to removing any organs. The medical examiner is still doing the autopsy, but it counted, and all the organs are still there." Danny shivered, remembering the girl in the alley. "So Danny did interrupt the unsub in the middle of his work," said Louis. "Looks like it." There was the sound of more paper moving. "But what interests me is this," said the detective, and Danny cracked open an eyelid to see what she was showing. "Can't see what they are looking at," said Sam. The adults all had their attention on the photo the red-headed detective was holding up. "Danny?" she asked, and he knew what she wanted. Glancing around the room, Danny made a decision. "Make sure no one notices," he told Tucker, and touched that inner cold ghost part of himself disappearing from the visible spectrum. "Sure thing," said Tucker to the empty seat as Danny walked through the glass wall and into the conference room, floating over to stand atop the table to get a better look. The photo in the redhead's hands was of a drop of blood on the concrete with a measurement beside it. Danny could also pick out spots of green in the blood splatter. His blood. "It's a drop of blood," said Prentice, taking the picture from the detective. "Yes, and something more that we are still analyzing. But I'm pretty sure that's the second Vic's blood. We found the same green stuff on the dumpster lid." He picked up another picture that showed the dumpster lid and the blood stain on top of it, together with what Danny recognized as ectoplasm. "What's so important with this drop?" asked Rossi, looking at the picture with Prentice. "You know that we can determine from what height the blood drop fell from by measuring how much it splatters on the ground," said Detective Vega, tapping a note on the report. "This says that the drop of blood came from approximately 12 yards above ground." Danny felt his stomach turn. 12 yards, said Prentice, a puzzled expression on her face. "Isn't that about the same height as a 5-story building?" "Yes, it is, and that's why I went up to the roof of the building with the Indian restaurant and found this." He showed a picture of green ectoplasm on the roof that just got a few specks of blood in it. "We still don't know what the green stuff is, but I'm pretty sure that our second Vic was up there when he got stabbed and somehow jumped down and survived." The silence that followed was broken when Luke pointed out the obvious. "How did he get up there if the Ansab was attacking him?" "I have not figured that one out yet, but you can't ignore the fact something doesn't add up here." He took back the pictures. "More than that, there isn't much more difference to this crime scene than others." "Thank you. Tell us when you know what the green stuff is," said Rossi, and turned to Jero. "How did it go with the witnesses at the hospital?" he asked, clearly having dismissed the detective. "Dead end," she said, and Danny decided that it was time to go back to the interview room before anyone looked his way. Nobody could give a description of the man's appearance more than that he was wearing a dark trench coat, broad-brimmed hat, and carried a cane, and walked straight for the ER. The door to the conference room opened and closed as Detective Vega walked out. Danny had his back against the glass wall, about to face through it, when a familiar shiver went up his spine and he saw his breath escaping his mouth in a blue vapor. Eyes flickering around the room, he was suddenly struck from behind and fell onto the floor, Sam and Tucker landing on top of him. Shouting in surprise, agonizing pain shooting through Danny's abdomen, a cry of pain escaped his lips as he turned visible. "There we go, now everyone is in the room," said a familiar voice, and the 3 teenagers scrambled to their feet. End of chapter 7.